Have you ever given your best to someone only to watch them throw it away? You poured your heart into helping them, devoted your time and energy, but they saw no value in what you offered. They criticized, dismissed, and made you feel like you were never good enough. This is a story about a woman who learned something profound, that not everyone deserves a seat at your table, and your worth isn't determined by those who refuse to see it. In a small coastal town where waves whispered against ancient stones and seabirds called through the morning mist, there lived a potter named Elena. She created beautiful clay vessels, bowls that held warmth like an embrace, cups that felt perfect in tired hands, vases that seemed to capture the light itself. Her workshop sat near the harbor, a humble space filled with the earthy smell of wet clay, wood smoke, and the quiet spinning of her potter's wheel. Elena was known throughout the town for her gentle spirit and patient hands. She would spend hours perfecting a single piece, her fingers moving with practiced grace across the clay, coaxing beauty from the earth. People said her pottery had soul, that each piece carried a bit of her heart. Living next door was Mrs. Russo, a wealthy merchant's widow who collected fine things from distant lands. Her home was filled with crystal from Venice, silks from the East, and porcelain from China. She had more possessions than she could count, yet she always wanted more. Mrs. Russo would visit Elena's workshop regularly, running her jeweled fingers over the pottery with a critical eye and a thin smile. "This handle is slightly crooked," she'd say, tilting a cup to the light. "That glaze isn't quite even here. See this imperfection?" Yet despite her complaints, she'd take pieces home, promising to pay once she was certain of their quality. Days later, she'd return them, claiming they were fundamentally flawed. "It doesn't match my table," she'd announce. "The colors seem different in your shop. I expected better craftsmanship." Elena would listen carefully, her heart sinking with each criticism. She'd take back the pieces and try again, working late into the night by candlelight, her hands aching, her eyes tired, determined to achieve the perfection Mrs. Russo demanded. She'd reshape handles 3 times, remix glazes to get the exact shade, fire pieces repeatedly until they seemed flawless. But nothing was ever good enough. "Too heavy for daily use," Mrs. Russo would complain one week. "Too plain, it lacks sophistication," she'd say the next. "Too rough, I expect smoother finishes from someone of your reputation." Other potters in the town noticed what was happening. Old Marco, who made roof tiles, pulled Elena aside one day. "She's playing with you," he said gruffly. "She uses your pieces until she's bored, then invents reasons to return them. She's done this to half the craftspeople in town." Maria, the weaver, nodded in agreement. "She kept my finest tablecloth for 2 months, used it for 3 dinner parties, then returned it claiming the pattern made her guests dizzy. Don't waste your gift on her." But Elena persisted, unable to shake the feeling that she was somehow failing. "Maybe I'm just not skilled enough yet," she'd tell herself, staring at returned pieces. "Maybe if I try harder, work longer, care more, I'll finally create something worthy of her approval." The need for Mrs. Russo's validation became a weight she carried everywhere. One autumn morning when the sea was calm and the air smelled of salt and departing summer, a traveling artist arrived at the harbor. She was an old woman with silver hair braided with colored threads, paint-stained fingers, and eyes that seemed to hold centuries of wisdom. She wandered slowly through the town, observing the craftspeople at work. Eventually, she found her way to Elena's workshop and sat quietly on a wooden stool in the corner, simply watching as Elena worked, her face tight with concentration and worry. After a long silence, the old woman spoke. "You have gifted hands, child. Your pottery sings." Elena sighed deeply, her shoulders slumping. "If only my work was good enough for those who matter." The old woman tilted her head. "And who decides who matters?" "Those with refined taste," Elena replied. "Those who know quality. Those who—" "Tell me something," the old woman interrupted gently. "If you planted a garden in stone, would flowers grow?" Elena paused, her hand still on the clay. "Of course not. Stone has no soil, no nourishment." "Then why do you keep planting your gifts in stony hearts? Why do you water gardens that can bear no fruit?" Elena's hands stopped moving completely. She looked down at the clay, soft and responsive beneath her fingers, then at her calloused hands that had worked so hard for so little appreciation. But if I try harder, if I improve my craft. Child, the old woman said, standing and moving closer. A pearl doesn't spend its life convincing the oyster of its worth. It simply is. A flower doesn't apologize for its fragrance. The moon doesn't dim itself because clouds pass overhead. Your problem isn't your pottery, it's where you're choosing to offer it. She placed a weathered hand on Elena's shoulder. There are people in this world who will never see your value because seeing it would require them to acknowledge something beautiful that they themselves cannot create. They diminish you to elevate themselves. Stop giving your masterpieces to those who treat them like dirt. The words settled into Elena like rain into dry earth, filling cracks she didn't know were there. The next day, when Mrs. Russo arrived with yet another piece and another complaint, Elena did something she'd never done before. She smiled genuinely, took back the pottery without argument, and said simply, "Perhaps my work isn't right for you." Mrs. Russo blinked, clearly surprised by the lack of apology. "Well, if you would just fix the— I make what I make," Elena said peacefully, her voice steady and sure. "My pottery is honest and crafted with care. It will find those who appreciate it as it is." "But surely you want to improve." "I'm always improving," Elena replied, "but not to become someone else's idea of perfection. To become more fully myself." Mrs. Russo stood speechless for a moment, then turned and left with an indignant huff. Elena felt something shift inside her, a lightness, like setting down a burden she'd carried too long. She stopped trying to please the unpleasable. Instead, she placed her best pieces in the town square with a simple sign: "For those who see." A fisherman bought a wide bowl, his weathered face breaking into a smile. "It reminds me of the sea at dawn," he said. "I'll eat every meal from this and remember why I love my life." A teacher chose a simple cup, holding it with both hands. "It feels like meditation," she whispered. "My morning tea will taste different in this." A young mother selected a vase, tears streaming down her face. "My grandmother had one almost like this. She's gone now, but this brings her back to me." These people didn't critique or demand changes. They cherished, they saw, they understood. Word spread differently now, not about Elena's willingness to please, but about the soul in her work. 3 weeks later, Mrs. Russo passed through the town square and saw Elena's pottery admired and purchased by people of all kinds. She watched a child gently touch a small bowl, eyes wide with wonder. She saw the fisherman return to buy pieces for his daughters. Something in her expression shifted. Perhaps shame, perhaps recognition. She approached Elena's workshop, her voice softer than before. "Perhaps I was too hasty in my judgments." Elena looked up from her wheel, hands covered in clay, and smiled with genuine warmth. She wiped her hands, picked up a simple cup, and offered it. "This is my work," she said. "If it speaks to you, truly speaks to you, it's yours. If not, that's perfectly fine too. I no longer need to convince anyone of its value." Mrs. Russo held the cup, really looked at it for the first time, not for flaws, but for beauty. Something shifted in her expression. She saw the subtle variations in glaze, the human touch in every curve, the love baked into the clay. But Elena no longer needed her approval. She had found her people, those who saw value without being convinced, those whose hearts were gardens, not stone. That evening, as the sun set over the harbor, painting the sky in shades of amber and rose, Elena sat at her wheel shaping clay. Her movements were freer now, more joyful. She whispered to herself words that felt like freedom. "I am not for everyone. My gifts are not for everyone. And that is not just acceptable, it is perfectly, beautifully fine." The clay spun beneath her hands, becoming something beautiful, something true, something entirely her own. Your worth isn't determined by those who can't see it. Save your masterpieces for those who recognize them as such.